From the halls of Austin to the fights in D.C. that hit us at home, this is Politics with the Big Dogs.
Hello, hello, hello. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. Great show for you. So much content, guys. Such big action this week, upcoming next week. We got to talk about, for sure, the rise of the Democratic Socialist Islamic activist group. The Michigan Democratic primary for the U.S. Senate was a big moment. Now, there have been others, so we're going to go in depth in it, what it means. We're also going to, we've got to get some predictions out there. My predictions, remind us of Governor Abbott's, and have a talk about what's coming up. We're about 90 days or so out of the November election, which means voting, actually, we're much closer to that. HISD, the Houston Independent School Board, the year going to flip. We've talked about some of this in the past, but there's a conservative activist. She's the head of, or effectively the head of, the effort to make sure that sexually explicit books and content are not available to our children in public schools. You and I got together, conservatives got together, we pressured the legislature that we're supposed to make this so the schools were responsive to outcomes of the child, like educating them and not failing them, habitually failing schools, and instead, they're trying to indoctrinate them with really explicit content. So some events occurred around that, and it resulted in litigation, pending lawsuit. Hallelujah. Go trial lawyers for trying to use the courts to affect change where the legislature and the community won't. There's no way around it. And then we've got to talk about what's going on in McKinney, Texas. It's not just McKinney. It's throughout Texas, particularly focused on North Texas. I want to make sure it is not missed that there was 100+ overflow crowd this week in McKinney, Texas, and talk to you about yet another mosque coming. If we have time, we're going to hit Rob Schneider and what's going on in the debate there. Lots of action. There's just so much more to hit and talk about. But here we are. So saddle up and get ready. This is Anthony Holm, host of Politics with the Big Dogs. If you're just catching us for the first time, know that these radio shows and more are converted to podcasts. They're on Spotify. They're on YouTube. They're on Apple. They're every place you'd expect it. Follow us at politicswiththebigdogs.com. You can sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's short, but it keeps you informed. And then please, please, please go to politicswiththebigdogs.com and sign our petition. So we set up a petition to ensure that the legislature actually bans taxpayer-funded lobbying. And if you're just catching this early or you've missed it, we talked about it a lot on this show, but basically in a thumbnail, about $250 million a year of your tax dollars, our tax dollars, is used at the local level, cities, communities, MUDs, others, and then what they do is they take our money and they hire legislative lobbyists in Austin who lobby the legislature. And what do? Lobby for? They lobby for those same local communities, cities, counties, MUDs, and others to have the power to increase taxes on us and spend more on the lobbyists. There's just no way around it, right? So there is a practice that has been permitted to occur, and there's legions and legions of of lobbyists making many millions of dollars. $250 million have already been spent on this, lobbying on behalf of all these cities, these little tiny communities. Some of them have population of 11,000, and they spent $500,000 on lobbying. It's just insane. So we got to ban this, and it takes a lot of force of will for the Republican-led legislature to do it because many of their friends are lobbying for these groups and making money. But on our website, politicswiththebigdogs.com, you could sign up, put in your name, address, and we'll automatically send your state rep and your state senator a signed letter saying, pass this now. So that's what we're doing. All right, guys, hold on to your hats because we have a big show coming at you. So this week just saw the Democrat Socialists of America enjoy tremendous success, right? So previously it had been the crazies. It had been the far East Coast, New York City, New York crazies of the Bernie Sanders DSA, Democratic Socialist movement, and then the far West Coast out in California. But Michigan this week saw the rise of the Islamist DSA, right? So Michigan and Minnesota, where Barack Obama put tens of thousands of Muslims, and they started taking over 20-ish years ago, taking over local governments and wearing, hijabs and saying, supporting terrorism, at least in their slogans and their statements, right? So Abdul El-Sayed comes out of outside of Detroit. His dad is an immigrant from Egypt. Abdul was born here and raised in this Islamist society and this movement in Michigan, and goes on and goes to all sorts of Ivy League schools and Rhodes Scholar, you name it. But now he's a Democratic socialist and an activist for Bernie Sanders, and has been for 8 or 10 years. Well, he won the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate. So now the Islamists and this movement out of Michigan nationally, both the Democratic socialists who just believe the free market system is terrible and want to tax us into oblivion, have advanced the Islamists. Wow, and this is after the Democratic Party, like the so-called mainstreams, who are radical and nutballs anyway, that Michigan governor, Gretchen Whitmer, even she is a radical extremist. We saw that in her last 20 years of her political life. So she and others spent tens of millions leading an effort to try to take this guy out, and they lost. So the radical Islamists defeated a so-called moderate, Haley Stevens, a woman named Haley Stevens in Michigan, after like $45 million was spent by the Democrats, so-called mainstream, trying to defeat Abdul El-Sayed. This is what the Democratic Party is. They chant pro-terrorist slogans. There's no way around it. They're building mosques. They believe that taxes are not high enough and that they can regulate our entire government, medical, and food system better than the market forces can. And they want to bring their power and their ideas and their beliefs to our homes. No way around it. And you see this incredible marquee event, the November election with Abdul El-Sayed against the Republican for the United States Senate in Michigan. Did we ever think we'd be saying these words? So we got a guy named Mike Rogers, who's a former U.S. congressman in Michigan, who's a Republican nominee. It's an open seat. The incumbent U.S. senator decided not to run. So Rogers versus Abdul El-Sayed. And it's a toss-up. It is a toss-up race. An Islamist activist who goes on a podcast with other Islamist guy what country was that fellow from? But applauds a terrorist group, Hamas. Just applauds them. Says, I don't even think they're a terrorist group, right? This is the profile of individual who have taken over the Democratic Party, who have taken over big parts of Michigan, arguably all of it, who have taken over big swaths of Minnesota. This is the profile of individual who the Democrat Party in America has become. Shocking. I'm sorry. I said Hamas and I misspoke. It was Hezbollah. It's actually worse, right? So El-Sayed goes on, this guy named Hassan Piker. I can't remember Hassan's family or Syrians or where, but Hassan Piker is a hardcore activist in the Democratic movement, has, I think, millions of people following him on some type of social media. So El-Sayed says, I'm running for, Michigan, U.S. Senate, and I want your help. And he goes on his show and supports Piker, who says, Hezbollah is not a problem. They're not a terrorist organization. I'm with them. This is the profile of person Michigan Democrats want as their next U.S. Senator, somebody who will go on Hassan Piker's show and support the growth of that show, even though Hezbollah, who has killed and targeted many, many Americans, Piker's defending him. They're not a problem. This guy, El-Sayed, who is now the nominee, Abdul, the nominee for U.S. Senate on the Democrats, was talking about a Democratic United States Senator in Pennsylvania and said, oh, yeah, he's just not liberal enough. We need to put his head on the end of a pike and put it outside the doors. John Fetterman, who has the audacity to say, hey, everybody should have a photo ID when they vote, right? Democrat, hardcore Democrat, from my perspective, at least when he ran, a U.S. senator from Pennsylvania elected, and said, photo ID makes a lot of sense. What are we doing not having a photo ID? You need an ID for everything else. It's crazy. Well, that was enough. And what does Abdul El-Sayed, the new Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate in Michigan, say? He said, here's what you do. You put one ogre on a pike, and then everybody else gets the message. This was in a private, so-called private call when he was on with all these big donors supporting him and say, here's how I'm going to handle that guy. Here's how we're going to make sure voter ID does not pass in America. You know, like the SAVE Act that John Cornyn and Tillis and Thune are contesting, saying they agree with it, but can't get it done, blah, blah, blah. You know, we'll leave Cornyn for another day because he's very much impairing donations to the Republican Ken Paxton, which is obviously helping Tallarico. But let's stay focused on El-Sayed, Abdul over here, since this week he won the Democratic nominee. He said about a Democratic U.S. senator who he hopes to be a colleague with. Now you just put one ogre on a pike and then everybody else gets the message. This is what this guy believes. He hangs out with and is close to people who say, hey, Hezbollah is not a problem. Oh, they're killing American soldiers. They're targeting, they're blowing things up. They're sending missiles, they're sending bombs. They're not a problem. Oh, the U.S. government says they're a terrorist organization? Nah, ignore them. And Abdul El-Sayed and Hassan Piker both stand against Israel. And let's be real square about this. When somebody is saying free Palestine, and isn't denouncing the Palestinian attacks from 2.5 years ago on Israel, then they're supporting terrorism. There's no way around it. More than 2,000 people were killed. Israel's 9/11 happened, and El-Sayed and Hassan Piker are A-OK with it. Oh, yeah, a whole bunch of crazy guys and motorcycles and machine guns go and kill and rape and pillage Israeli kids at a big outside concert, and then grab and take as hostage, 200 or more, and hold them in underground tunnels in excess of a year and leave their bodies and drag them around. And Abdul El-Sayed and Hassan Piker and the Islamist movement in America say, oh yeah, we stand with Palestine. They should have self-determination. I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, it happened, but that's because, the Jews were hard on the Palestinians. So that's life. This is their position. This is how dismissive they are. They're defending implicitly or explicitly terrorists killing Americans. They're defending taking out a U.S. senator because he's, number one, a Democrat, and number two, says voter ID, photo ID makes a lot of sense. You ought to have it. Okay, here's what we'll do. We'll put one ogre on a pike, and then everyone will get the message that they can't do that. Obama and others in the Democratic movement, let's just cut to it. They moved tens of thousands of Islamists into very tight jurisdictions in Midwest 20-ish, 30-ish years ago and encouraged those groups of people to take over a community, to get a majority elected on the school board, get a majority elected at city council, get a majority elected and move up through the ranks. And now that you have a U.S. Congresswoman, a Somali from Minnesota who is just crazy as all can be and perhaps not even legally permitted to be in the U.S. Congress. You have Abdul El-Sayed now as a Democratic nominee for U.S. Senator who may win that Senate seat. And we're seeing it across Texas, the rise of the Islamist movement. We've talked about it plenty here, and we just had another event in McKinney. Like, guys, this is what is happening. This feels like a battle for the soul of America. After 250th celebration, here we are talking about socialist takeover of the U.S. Senate, Islamist takeover of a U.S. Senate seat, Islamist takeover of portions of Texas. I mean, all these Republicans who claim to be strong Christians and running on faith and banning books and doing the things that they know we want done, even though they're not, are watching the rise of the mosque and the Islamist takeover, particularly in North Texas, particularly in Plano, Texas, particularly in McKinney, Texas, particularly in Collin County, home to Jeff Leach, who's been a so-called conservative Republican man of faith and elected to the Texas legislature for like 12 years. Nothing is changing. In fact, it's breaking against us. This event that happened this week where the state of Michigan narrowly, but elected nonetheless, Abdul El-Sayed as their Democratic nominee for U.S. Senate. Now the entire Democratic Party and all the mega donors in Hollywood and New York and elsewhere are going to fund against the Republican and try to get Abdul elected. It's just shocking. It's just shocking that this is what's happening to America when you and I and others are talking about our founding fathers and honoring just last month the 250th celebration of the greatest democracy, the greatest event to lift humans out of poverty ever known in recorded history. Yet it appears that there's a Muslim takeover happening as we sit and watch. All right, folks, we've got to move on to another subject matter. It's just, this one's almost too sad to discuss, but we just got to pray that Michael Rogers wins that U.S. Senate seat in Michigan. But nonetheless, this is going to be a battle that occurs all the way through, right, for the next many years in America. The rise of the Islamists and the democratic socialists, particularly among the 20 and 30-year-olds who are a tremendous group of America, a massive group. And probably we failed, we being those paying attention and grown adults in America over the last 20 years in our public schools, because I think that this indoctrination came in large part from our public schools. But here we are. We will fight on. Okay, guys, we've got to move on to another topic. So some of you may have heard about a group of activists headed, I believe, primarily by Bonnie Wallace, who's a strong conservative leader in Central Texas. I've known Bonnie for a while. In fact, I talked to her a few times about coming on the show, and she wants to, and frankly, I'll just try to get that scheduled. But I want to make sure we're all acutely aware, because over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, we've been fighting we conservatives have been fighting to ensure that children in our public schools are protected from indecent and inappropriate books and communications, right? It's been a big movement of the left to Tommy has two daddies, and we've talked about some of these things, but I want to make sure we're all aware that just a handful of strong activists lead these fights more often than not and bring them to the attention of all the rest of us. And Bonnie is one of them. She and her husband have been dedicated to this issue for years, and she was booted out, actually physically escorted out by multiple officers at a Houston ISD school board meeting a few months ago. All she did was she signed up honestly, openly, publicly, right? You get like 1 minute to speak, and this was in March. And Bonnie said, hey, you guys still have, even though we've passed all of these laws, you still have these books in HISDs and Houston Independent School District's libraries that are wholly inappropriate. And what does wholly inappropriate mean? It's a subjective statement, and you have an older person from the Hill Country, Central Texas. Okay, maybe they have a different opinion than the people at HISD. But Bonnie, all she did was read verbatim from one of the books, and the vice chair and other members of the HISD school board who are elected intervened and said, this is not appropriate. This is inappropriate content. We have a decorum mandate. Our rules, you can't share. You can't use words like this. You've got to stop. They said, quote, it's offensiveness. This is inappropriate content. You cannot state these things publicly in our meetings. You're just being disruptive. And what Bonnie was doing was reading from the book or that she found in multiple HISD libraries. I can't read it on this show. I mean, it's that descriptive and that inappropriate. But I want to make sure that we all have the same fundamental knowledge and base, because now this has moved into litigation. Bonnie is just a warrior for our children in public schools, and nobody at HISD is doing anything about it and hasn't, right? So you and I and others, the activist movement in Texas that said, hey, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 10-year-olds should not have this in their libraries. This is not what we want as parents, directing the self-interest of our child. And of course, these government-run schools, they just do what they want, top to bottom. So I'm going to try to describe. Well, first let me tell you the name of the book. Bonnie got up there and read for less than a minute, and did it calmly and appropriately, and was not yelling or screaming or out of her line of her time. A Court of Silver Flames. So that was the book, A Court of Silver Flames. And it very graphically speaks about and names intimate body parts. And in this man's intimate body part was enormous. She wrapped her hands around between the lips, snapped something. And I'm leaving key statements out, key words out. But I think you can fill in the blanks, and even I feel uncomfortable broadcasting this because I don't want to invade your ears or mind or mentality with something that you don't want to have a visual representation of, right? I'm a 53-year-old father of children, and I wouldn't have wanted my young kids, and still don't want my children reading this type of material, and sure as heck don't want my tax dollars used to buy it and maintain it in our government-run public schools, right? So Bonnie, to her great credit, and we're just going to have her on, there's no way around it, showed up at HISD and said, guys, we passed these state laws. They're supposed to, these laws ban inappropriate content in our public schools. You've got to stop this. Why are they still here? Bonnie was a great activist leader for those bills. You guys helped. I helped. All of us did. And it was just insane. HISD school board, which has been, they still exist because they were voted in, but the school system failed the students so long for so many years in a row and had so many failing schools that TEA, the state education agency, put a board of managers in place to try to effectively run it and change the outcomes for all of these children who were trapped in failing public schools, habitually failing, where the adults in the system wouldn't do anything about it. But oh my, if you show up to one of their school district meetings and you say, hey, let me read for 30 seconds or so some of the books that are in your libraries, they just are outraged and say, you can't say that here. You can't use that language. You can't come and disrupt our meeting with such vile, inappropriate content. And they had police escort her out. They had police escort out, I don't know, a 60-something-year-old woman for reading content from the book that is in the schools where 13, 14, 15-year-old children attend, our children. And this is after the Texas legislature passed, these so-called laws to ensure that no inappropriate content was in our books, in our school libraries. What are we doing here? And again, the legislature keeps telling us, remember, we banned Sharia law. Here we are with more mosques and more Muslims saying, we have Sharia law. It's already here. We're enforcing it. We're advancing it. So they didn't ban Sharia law. They only banned, it was already banned. They only banned aspects of things that were already illegal. There's just no way around it. We did actually have to go and implement a ban on inappropriate, offensive content in our public schools. But HISD, our largest school system, is ignoring it, I believe, top to bottom, unless they don't think that language that Bonnie read was inappropriate, indecent, or offensive, even though Angela Lemon Flowers, who was the vice chair and at the time was the presiding officer of that HISD school board meeting, said this is inappropriate and had her thrown out. You can find this online. You can look at the video. Big, bulky HISD police officers with weapons taking this old white-haired lady, and walking her out and making her leave the meeting. Guess what, guys? I'm a trial lawyer. We've talked about that many, many times, and this is one of the reasons I'm proud to be a trial lawyer, because Bonnie found a lawyer who would represent her, and they brought a federal lawsuit, a DEC action seeking injunctive relief and damages, saying, hey, you have violated the law. You violate a law in a number, right? A number of laws, state and federal. You're keeping this book, A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah Maas, which is sexually explicit content. There's no way around it. HISD has approved it and placed it in more than one library in your system and making these books accessible to minors. There's no way around it, even though it is illegal. When you throw out Bonnie and you say you can't use these words, you say you can't read from this book, it's an egregious form of content regulation, period. And Bonnie drove all the way from Central Texas to say, hey, guys, I want you to know that this is out there and somebody has failed. Go fix it. Go pull these books out of the library so minors don't get exposed to them. This is not what we want for our children. And what did they do? The police made her leave. And the elected officials at HISD who have so failed all of the children they were elected to help and represent. And, of course, they weren't elected to help. You know, that's only in theory. They're really out there helping the adults, helping the teachers and the superintendents and ensuring that those people's interests are being looked out for, not the interests of the public school children who attend and are supposed to be able to read and write at grade level and can't because HISD has habitually failed them, often for a generation. So it's Richard Campo, the president of the HISD, Angela Lemon Flowers, who was the vice president and was running the board meeting on March 19th of that date. So look, Carl Tepper and these bought and paid for TLR state legislators like to complain about trial lawyers and specifically complain about me. I am proud to bring actions like this. This is not one I'm litigating. It's not in the wheelhouse of my greatest skill set, but I'm sure happy that somebody brought this litigation and is standing up for Bonnie and her rights, and as she stands up for the rights and the decency of our children and says, HISD, this shall happen no more. Pull the books and stop trying to squelch my speech. Like, hallelujah. I'm a lawyer. You know it. I'm a trial lawyer. I go to trial. I stand in front of juries. I stand in front of judges, and I'm proud to do it. It's hard work. It's honorable. I try to help people who are wronged, and I'm real proud of Bonnie for, number one, taking this fight on, number two, having the courage to drive all the way to Houston from Central Texas and read a passage of this book, and number three, understanding her self-worth and dignity as she's walked out by police in front of rooms of people. You know, that's an awkward feeling when you know you're right, but everybody tries to shame you and put badges on you and says, leave, leave, leave. It's that groupthink effort. And now having the courage to file a federal lawsuit. Good for you, Bonnie. We'll get her on the show, but everybody needs to understand this. HISD and so many other school boards out there, they're looking out for the interests of the adults. They're elected by the interests of the adults. That's why they always want their elections in May and not on November ballot, so that just the teachers unions and the pro-school superintendent groups can elect them, right? That's just the bottom line. Then they can direct contracts to their friends and ensure that student outcomes are way down the list of priorities. And obviously, they don't have to police their own libraries. They're putting content like this into the hands of minors. So against state law, at least arguably against state law, because you and I fought for these laws for so long and so hard. So we need to support folks like Bonnie, and we need to follow their lead and not be afraid to raise our hand and raise our voice and protect what we know is right and good in the world and the values that are decent for our children. So once again, the Texas legislature, led by Republicans, swore up and down to us in 2023, don't worry, we've got this. This is wrong. We're going to stop it. We just passed a law to ban sexually explicit material in public schools. But here we are, 3 years later, and old Bonnie, a 60-ish something-year-old grandma, has a drive from Central Texas to Houston to educate the HISD school board. And what has she met with? Shame, name-calling, silence, trying to silence her because she spoke for 45 seconds and read from a book that is in more than one public school library in HISD. They said it's inappropriate, it's offensive content. Don't force that upon our ears. What's the alternative? when you can't count on the legislature, the court set law and the jury system is a pretty beautiful thing. I know a lot of these Republicans who are defending big business, they want to end the jury system. They want to say it's just advisory, a jury's ruling, 12 jurors hear everything. Well, it's just advisory. We're going to let another judge decide whether the jury's right or not. I mean, that's just fundamentally wrong. It's fundamentally un-American. And that is where many, many folks in Texas legislature are trying to take the law. But remember, the Republican leaders of the Republican-led legislature in 2013 swore to us, we passed the law, sexually explicit material will no longer be in Texas public schools. Here we are 3 years later, and Bonnie's having to litigate at the federal level to get books like the one I just described out of our public schools. All right, folks, we've got to move on to the next topic. There's just so much action, but I never want us to forget the incredible leadership and the incredible courage of so many Texans who are fighting for our values day in and day out. Look, I want to revisit some of these predictions, right? We're getting closer and closer. What are we, about 90 days out, maybe even less from the November election. And I got to give kudos to Governor Abbott, who said about a year ago, he said, we're going to flip Harris County. It's going to go red, period. In November of 25, he said this many, many times, but here's his quote. I've got about 90 million in my bank account, and I will spend most of it in Harris County. And then the article went on to interview some of his team who said, yes, we're going to put a field staffer in all 24 different state rep districts that are in Harris County or touch Harris County. So Abbott and Abbott's campaign committed to spending more than $45 million in Harris County to make it red, period. At least $45 million, right? And committed to putting 24 staff on the ground doing field work. Because Harris County, it's kind of it was reliably red, and then it vacillated, and there was a period, I think Obama won it by like 1,000 votes. So more and more it's trended blue. There's no way around it. I think perhaps one could argue it's purple. The off cycle 4 years ago did see a handful of Republican judges elected in the countywide. They were, I believe, all women, 6, maybe even 7 women. In fact, I think I was going to have one on the show a good while back, one of the judges, just how they did it. I can't remember if we talked about that or not, but here we are, 90-ish days out from the election, and Abbott certainly has more than 90 million available to him. But he said, and then in January of this year, he said, I will win Harris County. I won it when I was first elected. I'm going to win it this year, period. So Abbott's committed to flipping Harris County, at least for himself. But he further, this is in quote, this is my interpretation of what he said. He said, but I've got to spend enough and do enough to make sure others win. Other Republicans obviously win as well, Harris County. So look, if Abbott and his team are able to do that, number one, it'd just be incredible. The statewide ticket would benefit so much. It would be incredible. And he does have north of 100 million, right? So if he spent 50 million, 70 million in Harris County, wow, imagine what that would do for the entire ticket. The Republicans would just eviscerate them. And the other thing is, it's pretty obvious that Governor Abbott's trying to run for president in 2 years, or he'll have to launch a campaign, less time than that. If he is able to lead on Harris County and flip it to the R's, Harris County will be the most populous county in America that votes Republican. I mean, what a marquee statement for anybody running for president to say, hey, this place had voted for Democrats in the last 4 presidentials, and I just turned it materially red through my message, through my money, through my efforts. And we're going to keep it red. It just voted for me. It's going to vote for me again in president. Like, holy smokes. That's a really strong, powerful statement, because it will be the largest county, at least the largest by population, in America that goes red for Republicans. That's a really powerful thing. So first, right, Abbott's got to step up and do what he said he was going to do. He repeated this over and over. It was part of his stump speech. It was his commitment to Texans. There's no way around it. Got to put his money where his mouth is. I have no indication that he won't, right? But he said, I've got about $90 million in my bank account. I'll spend most of it in Harris County. So at least $45 million needs to go in there, really probably $50 to $70 million. And then I will win Harris County. He said it many, many times. I don't need to repeat it. I don't need to go and get his audio file because he just said it so many times. I'm curious if it's going to happen. I'm curious what you guys think. Will Abbott and or other Republicans win Harris County in November? Powerful statements, powerful predictions. So let's see. All right, guys, I'm going to make a prediction. And we do that occasionally. We've got to check ourselves on the back end. We'll check Abbott on this one. I'm going to have to check myself on what I'm about to say. It's going to be a little bit longer timeline, but here we go. It's around Dan Patrick and his son Ryan Patrick. So Dan Patrick, Republican Lieutenant Governor of Texas, somebody I have traditionally had a personal affinity for, close to him when he was a Texas senator, and then in his campaign for Light Gov, and I believe he, particularly early on, he really was such a wonderfully effective and capable, strong conservative helping us advance policy at the statewide level. There's no way around it as lieutenant governor. But Dan's been there a good while, and he had a big career prior. So Dan's 75 years old. Lots of people are still high functioning at 75, but, you know, he's a solid 75 and a half years old, as I recall. There's been a lot of buzz. We talked some of it on this show before, and I want to remind listeners, if you missed that episode, obviously you can go back, and everything's on all the Spotify and YouTube and podcasts. But I had a visit alone, short one. I think it was like 2 little short visits with Dan Patrick alone at the convention. So that was roughly 2 months ago. A lot of people speculating on his physical health and his mental health and things. I said at the last show, and I say it again, I did not note anything out of the ordinary. It was all kind of what you'd expect. A lot of commentary about him wearing his black jacket. I think it kind of looks cool, but he is 75 years old. He is thin. Thinner than he was traditionally, but, you know, so is America. The last couple of years, a lot of people's physical bodies have changed. We had a good exchange. I didn't notice anything slowing in the slightest. So I'm going to set those aside because that's not what this prediction about. Here's my prediction. His son, Ryan Patrick, who was a U.S. attorney in Harris County, so it means he was prosecuting people. He was a state district judge, also in Harris County, a lawyer. So a younger guy with a pretty distinguished career. But then he went and is the head of the largest lobby shop, single issue lobby group in Texas. And that's pretty unusual. He started it last December, right? I'm sure Ryan Patrick, who's, I don't know how old he is. I bet he's about 50-ish, maybe late 40s, maybe early to mid-50s. It looks a lot like Dan, sounds a lot like Dan, in my opinion. Clearly father and son, it shows. Well, he took on the largest lobby organization, Texans for Lawsuit Reform. He's their new CEO as of December of last year, and said, hey, I'm going to do a TLR 2.0. These guys have made a bunch of mistakes in the past and missteps, basically, and we're going to launch a newer version. So I visited a little bit with Ryan as well. I couldn't get much out of him at the convention. He was there, as his dad was also. But here's my prediction, guys. I believe that the reason Ryan Patrick is not making $2 to $5 million a year in Houston, Texas as a lawyer, or working in some big corporate in their legal division, is because he's positioning himself to replace his dad for lieutenant governor. I suspect that Dan Patrick gets reelected in November. Certainly I'm voting for him. Encourage everybody else to. And I doubt he's going to run again, because that would put him at 80, right, when he's running, or 79 turning 80 upon returning to the lieutenant governor's office. So I believe very strongly that 4 years from now will be, 3.5 years from now, there'll be a contested primary for the Republican primary for lieutenant governor. And I suspect that Ryan Patrick, son of Dan Patrick, the current lieutenant governor, will be a candidate. So that's my prediction. And I bet Dan Patrick takes, what's he have, 35 million or so in his campaign account, and transfers much or all of it to his son, which is legal. So imagine that, right? So here's Ryan Patrick, former judge, former U.S. attorney prosecuting bad guys, who suddenly last year unexpectedly becomes the head of the largest single-issue lobby group in Texas, single-issue PAC, right? This is TLR's PAC, who's given millions to Democrats and many millions to Republicans. And it doesn't make a lot of sense. The guy's not been actively involved in legislative activity or otherwise. I think that he's doing that because he and those folks that he's associated with say, hey, this is a good springboard to be the next lieutenant governor of Texas. And this type of activity is pretty common, right? We've talked on this show about folks in Fort Bend County, like a brother trying to step in with the same or similar name to get an elected spot after somebody moves. We see fathers and sons all the time, the Bushes, the Kennedys, right? There's just these names that many voters wouldn't even realize that it wasn't Dan Patrick, that it was Ryan Patrick. They just assume it's the same person. And then if you have the head start of like a $30 million campaign transfer from your dad, holy smokes, that makes him a very formidable candidate. Very formidable. Probably the lead. So I'm going to make a prediction that that's what's going on, and Ryan Patrick is positioning himself to run for lieutenant governor. And it makes me wonder, what do the Texas senators in that body think about that? I bet a lot of them are thinking, hey, Dan Patrick's probably going to not run for re-election. I'm going to position myself for re-election or election and see if I can't become elected lieutenant governor of Texas. What does that mean over the next 4 years? How do they all handle this situation? Does Ryan Patrick come out and make a vow, I won't do that? Even if he does it stick? I'm not saying that his word doesn't matter. I don't know him. But a lot of people, particularly when the elected office is dangled in front of them, make a change. Does Dan Patrick come out and say, heck no, I'm not going to transfer money. If he wants to run, it's his business. Maybe. But this is my prediction that we have an open lieutenant governor seat, and I believe Ryan Patrick will be a candidate for it in 3.5 years in the Republican primary. All right, and I'll be the first one to say that I am wrong if that doesn't happen without issue. It's just an opinion, it's just speculation, but I've been in the political game for a long time, and here's my prognostication. And then we spoke earlier about Governor Abbott's and him flipping Harris County. We're gonna know binary outcomes there in 90-ish days or so. Mine will take a couple years or a few years at least to play out, but we'll come and revisit it. Okay, guys, we've got to move on to another topic. And look, if you want to make some prognostications and estimates about who's going to win what elections, do it. I like to hear them. Moving on to another topic. This was underreported, but everybody needs to be acutely aware of it. There's just no way around it. So McKinney, Texas, which is a rich, wealthier enclave north of Plano even. So this is North Dallas, North Plano, Collin County up there. Conservative, traditionally, Anglo. I don't know that's overwhelmingly Anglo, but it is, and it primarily at least, or the plurality of it, I believe. Well educated relative to the state, and like I said, moneyed, right? Tend to be conservative, tend to be Christian faith. Well, this week there was a city council meeting that had over 100 people there. It just doesn't happen in the town of McKinney, and it was so well attended that there was overflow space. And the fire marshal was present, and he said, you got to keep this place clean. You got to keep the exits clear. I'm going to start handing out citations. There were that many people. There was chanting, there was shouting, there was signs. And among all of these people were a lot of Islamist activists, or at least Islamist supporters. And it's because there was yet another mosque on the agenda to be built. And they were asking the city for the right to have zoning and platting and build yet another mosque. There's just no way around it. And legions of voters, when I say legions, I mean 50, 80, 100, often older, Anglo, educated, clean. They weren't trying to disrupt like the Democrats do, but they're holding hand-painted signs like "Stop the Islamic Invasion," "Don't Sharia my Texas." And it just hardly made the news. A former mayor showed up and spoke in support permitting the construction. Of course, the police had to be there. I mean, I'm telling you, this building was just fully at capacity. That's why they had to have an overflow room so you could watch it and hear it and see it from there. So an older woman actually didn't hit, but made contact with the former mayor and said, "Look what you have done," and confronted him at the door and raises her hand up to him. I mean, this is a grandma. She looked like a grandma to me. What are you doing to our community? You allowed all of this to happen. You continue. You hear speaking in advancement of this. And look, it was a unanimous vote, no way around it, for the Islamist Association. So McKinney Islamist Association wanted a new Islamic center and a gym and a class building and a building of faith for them. These mosques are incredibly expensive, and they're just being built left and right. So the McKinney, a fairly small town in McKinney up there in North Dallas, votes unanimously to let it proceed. The elected leaders basically came out and said, "Hey, all of this is compliant. There's no cause for us to be able to vote against it." At least there's an intellectual basis. If you're going to regulate building and construction, if you regulate it uniformly, I get it. I see merit in there. I'm troubled by it. There's no way around it. I mean, people were shouting recall and traitor and just, elections are soon. And I bet it is. I bet they just get wiped out. Now, unless it goes the way of Michigan, right? And the Islamists all band together and start electing hijab wearing full burqa type people, because we're seeing that in different areas of Texas, and we're seeing it across the United States, particularly in Michigan and Minnesota and elsewhere, where Obama and the Democrats put tens of thousands of Islamists in smaller communities and helped them grow. There's just no way around it. I mean, that was a segment. The Michigan Democrat Socialist nominee is an Islamist, Abdul El-Sayed, right? We just talked about that. So it is happening here very much in Texas and very much in North Texas, where so-called, Christian Republican Jeff Leach, who pretty suspicious, right? This is the guy who tried to help elect Cornyn, was out on the stump, said, I'm gonna subpoena Ken Paxton, and he's going to come before my committee. And, he did everything he could to try to defeat Ken Paxton, try to defeat all the conservatives. He being Jeff Leach, is a total shill for TLR, Texas for Lawsuit Reform, his largest donors by far, many millions of dollars to keep that moderate Republican rhino coming back, or we take him out in the primaries. There's no way around it. The same guys who are funding millions of Democrats are funding Jeff Leach. But the question is, Leach, is he also a shill for the Islamists or other Republicans, so-called Christian Republicans elected in this area, right? Elected in McKinney, elected in Collin County. Are they secretly just letting it happen? Who's paying for it? What's going on? And if this is against the values of America, and more specifically the values of Texans, then why are our so-called Republican leaders not doing something about it? How come online conservative news have to, and really on X, I'm about to call it Twitter, a woman who was in McKinney saying, "Hey, everybody, look on the city council agenda this week, upcoming next week is a vote for yet another mosque in our community. Everybody show up." I mean, that's where we're learning it. It's not being reported in the mainstream news. Jeff Leach and his ilk aren't communicating about it or clearly doing, I think, anything about it. But if they are in the fight, they're wholly ineffective because yet another one's going up. So what do you and I, need to do as a community and as a movement to make sure that the values we hold dear and we believe our nation is predicated on are continuing to be taught in our schools and honored in our communities, while the groups like McKinney Islamic Association keeps banging up more and more mosques, keeps creating viral videos saying, you don't have to worry about Sharia law. It's already here. It's already in Texas. Sending out videos, calling on other people, other Islamists, move to Texas. There's loads of them that have had hundreds of thousands of views. Move to Texas. We are taking over. Allah will be at their breakfast table as their children grow. And those children's children will pray to Mecca. That's what's being said. There's no effort to assimilate, and particularly in North Texas and Collin County. And I just don't understand how these so-called Republicans who are elected in these communities are not doing something about it. I mean, there was one of the McKinney, Islamist community leaders stood up and said, hey, it's not about Sharia. Sharia is a practice, and it's okay. Really the concern you're talking about is enforcement of Sharia, and we're going to be a place of peace, and we ask for your approval. Like, it's not really about Sharia, it's about the enforcement of it, and maybe we won't enforce it, and we're going to be people of peace. That's what the Palestinians say. That's what Hezbollah says. That's what Hamas says. And maybe it's true for this McKinney group. I don't know them individually, but I've heard the same sentiment, and I've heard the same shield so many times and only seen terrorism. I mean, look at England. Look at Spain. Look at what's happening. Oh, Islam is a religion of peace, only to watch Islamists punch women in the face as they walk down the street pushing a baby carriage because that woman's face is exposed, or to be attacked under the name of Allah, or in the mosque, leaking out videos of it is okay to kill an infidel. It is okay. If they have been exposed to Allah and Islam and they don't convert, they don't have a right to exist. This is what's being preached in many, many mosques in the U.S. and certainly abroad. What's going on in Frisco and in Plano and Collin County and out in other areas of Texas? Yet again, the Republican-led legislature, our statewide elected officials, are not getting it done, or at least not getting it done. If they're doing something, it's the Jeff Leach style. It's just not having an effect. Yeah, Governor Abbott came out and designated, CARE as a foreign terrorist organization last year, but it sure didn't seem to stop much. CARE is the acronym for Council on American Islamic Relations. They're still all over Texas. They're still building communities and mosques and clearly have access to tremendous amounts of funds. And if you choose to go and look online, you will see people at the McKinney City Council in their full head wraps, full big beards, like a conservative portion of North Texas. If Islam is building mosques there, they're building them everywhere in Texas. Holy smokes, how are we letting this happen? All right, guys, we're out of time. Go to politicswiththebigdogs.com. Follow our podcast. There's 50 or so out there, incredible people. Ken Paxton's been a guest. John Buckingham's been a guest. Don Huffines, who was sworn in as comptroller early. He's also the Republican nominee. He was a guest. That was a great show. All of these are out there. Go and enjoy them. Thank you for the fight. Thank you for joining us, and may God bless Texas always. Fight on, my friends.
Politics with the Big Dogs with Anthony Holm is supported in part by the First Amendment Alliance Education Fund. Hear other episodes online in our archive. Visit politicswiththebigdogs.com. If you have a question for Anthony Holm, email Anthony at politicswiththebigdogs.com. From deep in the heart of Texas, you've been listening to Politics with the Big Dogs.